As you know, I'll be talking to you on principles of oxygen therapy. As you know, oxygen therapy is one of the most important treatment modality which is given to most of the patients who are admitted to the hospital. Unfortunately, this is the least understood modality. One of the most important reasons for this is that oxygen has not been appreciated as a drug. Like any other drug which has an indication, a route of administration, a dose, the oxygen therapy should also be given in proper indications. It should be given in a proper dose in terms of FiO2 or liters per minute. It should also be given through a proper device, be it a high flow device, be it a low flow device. So in order to understand the important issues which are related to oxygen therapy, what I am going to do is to discuss with you various indications of oxygen therapy. It is important to know the type of respiratory failure you are dealing because the indication of a device may be linked to a type of respiratory failure your patient is suffering from. You should also understand the pathophysiology of hypoxemia your patient has got. Then we will talk about goals of supplement oxygen therapy. What should be the endpoints when you are treating your patient with oxygen? You should have a very clear idea about oxygen delivery systems, the low flow and the high flow systems. And once you have chosen the right device, you have given the right dose, it is very important to monitor your patient on oxygen therapy. And it is important to ensure that your patient is not only adequately oxygenated, but there is a significant reduction in the cardiorespiratory work which is associated with hypoxemia. And you should also be aware of various complications which patient can have with oxygen therapy. These complications may be related with the FiO2 you are giving to the patient. It is also related with the duration of the treatment for which your patient is on therapy. So let us talk about the indications of oxygen therapy. The most common indication for oxygen therapy is respiratory failure, and or if the patient has got hypoxemia, if the blood PO2 levels are low. So hypoxemia with or without hypercapnia is the most important indication. We also give oxygen to our patients who have got tissue hypoxia without hypoxemia. These are the conditions like anemic hypoxia, circulatory hypoxia, cyanide poisoning, carbon monoxide poisoning, and patients with congestive heart failure, trauma, and hypovolemic shock. Patients with acute myocardial infarction and certain miscellaneous conditions like sickle cell crisis, acceleration of resorption in pneumothorax, and relief of dyspnea without hypoxemia. So these are the common indications for which we give our patient oxygen. Next, let us go into the long-term indication. So far we talked about acute condition in which patient comes with acute failure, the patients who requires long-term home oxygen. These are usually patients with COPD with chronic respiratory failure, or patient with diffuse pulmonary lung diseases with respiratory failure. The indications usually are when the resting PaO2 is less than 55 millimeter of mercury, or the oxygen saturation is less than 88%, or when the PO2 is between 55 and 99, but there is an evidence of chronic hypoxemia or tissue hypoxia in the form of carpomyopathy, in the form of polycythemia. And features of carpomyopathy you can see from either ECG or from echocardiography. The respiratory failure, when you are trying to classify, they can be divided into hypoxemic respiratory failure. This is when you have a patient whose room air PO2 is less than 50 or 60 millimeter, and there is an abnormal PaO2 FiO2 ratio. Now, hypoxemic respiratory failure is a very common failure. You see your patient with sepsis, with ARDS, pneumonia, with acute lung injury, viral pneumonias. So these are the common conditions you find a patient with hypoxemic respiratory failure. Then the second is the hypercapnic respiratory failure. Here there is the primary disorder of hyperventilation, and the primary abnormality is in the level of PCO2. Now these are the situations, these are the this kind of respiratory failure you will see in patient with primary respiratory depression due to drug toxicities, during anesthesias, sedative overdose. They can also be seen in patients with neuromuscular disorders. Then the third variety, what we very commonly see, is the mixed disorder, where you have both an evidence of hypoxemia as well as there is an evidence of hyperventilation. And I think the most important example for this condition is COPD, or acute exacerbation of COPD. So these are the three types of respiratory failure you will be seeing when you have to treat your patient with oxygen therapy. Now, it's very important to understand that when we are thinking in terms of oxygenation status of the patient, it is not the amount of oxygen in the blood which is important. What is important is the tissue oxygenation. And as you know here, that for proper tissue oxygenation, the three systems work together in tandem. The oxygen is taken from the environment and is transferred to the blood by the pulmonary system. So this process we call as oxygen uptake, and once it is transferred from the lung to the blood, then it is transported to the tissue. In the blood, the amount of oxygen which is carried or which can be carried in the blood would depend on the hemoglobin, the amount of dyshemoglobins in the form of methemoglobin or carboxyhemoglobin. It would also depend upon the oxygen saturation, the PO2. It would also depend on the cardiac output. So the oxygen, this process we call as oxygen transport. So the oxygen uptake is a measure of how good the lung is as an oxygenator. Oxygen transport is the cardiac output and the hemoglobin, and the last part is the oxygen delivery to the tissue and how this oxygen is unloaded at the tissue level. So, as I mentioned to you, the oxygen uptake is the movement of oxygen from the environment to the lung. We call it as is dependent on the functioning of the lung in that patient. The second is oxygen transport, which is the capability for transporting oxygen from the lungs to the tissues, and last is the delivery, which is the capability of the blood to offload oxygen from the tissue capillaries to the cells. And this also depends on the oxygen dissociation curve, the position of the oxygen dissociation curve, the P50 value, and which indicates the affinity of the oxygen with the hemoglobin. So it's the unloading. So oxygen therapy is actually useful when lung as an oxygenator is defective. The causes of hypoxia. What do we mean by hypoxia or hypoxemia is when the blood saturation, the oxygen saturation in the blood is low, or the PO2 in the blood is low. So once the PO2 is low, then there is a problem with the oxygen uptake. And in the lung, there can be number of pathophysiological mechanisms by which oxygen uptake can be affected. The most important is the amount of oxygen in the air which we are breathing in. As you all know, as we go up into the high altitude, the oxygen concentration in the environment starts decreasing, and so our blood oxygen levels goes down. So as you go to the height, and once you go above 10,000 feet, there is a significant drop in the oxygen saturation or the blood oxygen level in the form of PO2. This kind of a situation can be seen in the ICUs when there is a sudden drop in the FiO2. If there is a sudden change due to some error or some unknown reason, if the FiO2 is dropped, there can be a significant reduction in the PO2 or the oxygen saturation. The next important mechanism is the alveolar ventilation. If there is a drop in the alveolar ventilation, as can happen with the drug poisoning or it can be neuromuscular disorder, there can be a drop in the oxygen. The third is the ventilation perfusion mismatch. So if there is a gross mismatch between the ventilation and the perfusion, as you will see in airway disorders, this results in fall in oxygen. The fourth important mechanism is the shunt. Now, shunt is a process where the blood which is going from the venous side to the arterial side, when it travels through the lung units, it does not get any oxygen. Now, these are usually due to parenchymal disorders, which we commonly see as pneumonias, ARDS, or pneumothorax, atelectasis. These are the situations which are associated with the shunt. And the another important, which is though not very significant, is the diffusion defect, which we see in patients with diffuse pulmonary disorders. The last factor is the low mixed venous PO2. Now, if the oxygen content or oxygen PO2 of the mixed venous blood is very low, then particularly in situations where the lung is significantly diseased, then this blood may not get adequate opportunity to get oxygenated in the lung during its passage. So, situations of low cardiac output states where there is significantly high oxygen extraction at the tissue level, the mixed venous PO2 may be low, and if there is a significant lung disease, the PO2 of the blood may be low. So, these are the 5 pathophysiological mechanisms which are responsible for low PO2 in an individual. Now, it is important to understand that oxygen therapy, which is the topic of discussion today, is effective in first, second and the third condition. If the primary pathology is shunt, then this may not be amenable to oxygen therapy. So, these conditions which are parenchymal conditions associated with ARDS, pneumonias, atelectasis, are situations of refractory hypoxemia, and oxygen therapy will not be very effective unless we use some mechanical means of opening up of these alveolar unit before the oxygen therapy becomes effective in these cases. This is as I mentioned to you, is the oxygen transport, which depends on the cardiac output. It depends upon the hemoglobin, dyshemoglobins, the quantity of hemoglobin, which will decide about the oxygen transport. And at the tissue level, as you can see here, this is the oxygen dissociation curve. And we know that at 50% of saturation, the normal PO2 is around 26. So, if the oxygen dissociation curve is shifted to the left in situations of decrease in temperature, if there is a decrease in the 2,3 DPG level, or when there is a increase in the pH, so this results into leftward shift of the oxygen dissociation curve, and there is a reduction in the P50 values. So, this state is associated with decreased unloading of oxygen at the tissue level. So, in situations, particularly when your patient has got in the ICU with ARDS, who have got respiratory alkalemia, there is a gross pH shift, the dissociation, there is a gross shift of the oxygen dissociation curve to the left, and the pH is alkalemic. In such situation, the tissue unloading of oxygen can be significantly affected. So, how do we differentiate the different pathophysiological mechanisms? As I mentioned to you, in first situation where if there is a decrease in the oxygen content of the oxygen in the air, in that you can treat by giving oxygen. The second situation is as I mentioned to you, is the hypoventilation, and the third situation is VQ mismatch, fourth is the shunt. So how to differentiate first between hypoventilation and VQ mismatch and shunt, and for that we calculate the alveolar to arterial oxygen gradient. So this usually can be done by alveolar gas equation. So where you calculate the alveolar oxygen, you measure the PO2 from the ABG, and from that you calculate the AA gradient. The normal AA gradient is usually age dependent, and it can be calculated by this formula, which is 2.5 plus this is 0.1 into age is millimeter of mercury. So for a given particular age, there is a given normal AA gradient, and if this AA gradient is widened, significantly widened, then it is indicative of VQ mismatch or shunt. If the AA gradient is normal, then the most likely cause of hypoxemia or low PO2 in your patient is because of hypoventilation. So if the low PO2 in the blood is due to hypoventilation, in that case, instead of treating your patient with oxygen, it would be better to enhance the minute ventilation of this patient by non-invasive or invasive mechanical ventilation. The oxygenation status of this patient will improve. So here we have seen that if you want to differentiate between alveolar ventilation and the VQ mismatch, you will do the AA gradient. So this is the alveolar gas equation, as I mentioned to you. From this you calculate the alveolar PO2, and then you calculate the alveolar to arterial oxygen gradient. So once you have found that in your patient the alveolar to arterial gradient is wide, then the pathophysiological mechanisms responsible for low PO2 is either VQ mismatch or shunt, and this is not due to hypoventilation. Now the next step is then how to differentiate between VQ mismatch and a shunt. Now because the treatment is likely to be different. If it is VQ mismatch, your patient is likely to respond to oxygen. If it is due to shunt, your patient may not respond to oxygen therapy. So what you do is you repeat a blood gas sample with either 100% oxygen. If your patient is spontaneously breathing, this can be achieved by giving the patient mask with reservoir bag at 15 liters per minute. In that you can have up to FiO2 of about 0.8 to 0.9 oxygen you can give. Or the other option is that you can just increase the FiO2 by 2 and see the increase in the PO2. If the patient is responsive to oxygen therapy, which can be seen by increase in the PO2 of more than 10 millimeter, then your patient has got VQ mismatch. And if there is no significant change in the PO2 after you have increased the FiO2 by 0.2, then most likely your patient is having a shunt mechanism. And as I mentioned to you earlier, if the patient has VQ mismatch, then it is primarily due to airway disorders. Your patient can have COPD, asthma, and if it is because of shunt, it is mainly because of the parenchymal disorders. So here you can also assess your patient for tissue hypoxia, and there are certain markers like when the tissues are hypoxemic, the most important parameter is the urine output. The urine output falls. In most of the hypoxemic states, there is an increase in the sympathetic surge, which is usually associated with tachycardia, tachypnea, and also hypertension. So there is an increase in systolic and diastolic blood pressure. So there is a significant increase in the cardiorespiratory work. There is an increase in the blood lactate levels, which results into increased anion gap. There is acidosis, and you can also measure this by gastric tonometry. So in early stages of hypoxemia, there is a selective vasoconstriction of the splanchnic blood supply, and that you can pick up by gastric tonometry. So once you have found out that your patient who has got respiratory failure, whose PO2 is low, and the pathophysiological mechanism for hypoxemia is a VQ mismatch, then your patient is likely to respond to oxygen therapy very well. So what is the goal of oxygen therapy? The goals of oxygen therapy is basically to increase the alveolar oxygen tension. That means when you give oxygen to the patient, you are not changing the carbon dioxide level of the alveoli, because you are not ventilating your patient, but you are replacing nitrogen with oxygen. So basically you are increasing the alveolar oxygen tension by replacing nitrogen. Then the next goal is, and this is only possible by when there is no shunt mechanism. The next important factor is that when you give oxygen to the patient, there should be a significant drop in the cardiorespiratory work. That means it should be associated with significant decrease in the respiratory rate, heart rate, and blood pressures. Then you also see that you correct the hypoxemia. The PaO2 should be at least more than 60 millimeter, and the saturation should be more than or equal to 90%. It is very important that when you are dealing with patients with COPD, you should not be overdoing in giving oxygen therapy. So you should achieve the oxygenation, as I mentioned, above 90%, but it should not go beyond 92%. If you over-oxygenate your patient, then this can disrupt the local hypoxic reflexes and result in acute rise in CO2. And most of these patients may develop hypercapnia, drowsiness, and become narcotic due to high carbon dioxide level, and may end up into intubation and mechanical ventilation. So whenever you are treating your patient with oxygen, administer minimum therapeutic dose needed to obtain the desired results. Prescribe either as percentage, you can say 24%, 28%, or you can say FiO2 0.24. Assess bedside cardiac, pulmonary, neurological status before the beginning of therapy and during the course of therapy. Once you have started oxygen therapy in your patient, you should monitor this oxygen therapy by regular physical examination for cardiorespiratory system. Look for pulse, blood pressure, rhythm, perfusion state, skin color, texture, and capillary refill. Monitor the urine output of this patient. Look for the level of consciousness, ventilatory pattern. It should result in significant reduction in the patient's respiratory rate. And then periodically you can assess the oxygenation status of the patient by repeating their blood gases. Now it's very important when to decide about the type of oxygen device. Whenever you want to give oxygen therapy to your patient, whether you want to use low flow system or a high flow system, it depends on patient's pathophysiological condition and the background disease with which the patient is suffering from. Broadly, we can divide the oxygen delivery equipment into two types. They are variable performance low flow system or fixed performance high flow system. The choice of the equipment would depend on the degree of hypoxemia, requirement for precision of delivery, patient comfort, and the cost. Now, as you can see, the degree of hypoxemia would depend on the PO2 levels, and then accordingly you may have to choose the FiO2 which has to be given to the patient. Now, what is a variable performance low flow system? Here basically the gas flow is not sufficient to meet all the inspiratory demands of the patient. Now, what the common low flow system which you use is a nasal cannula, and you know here that the patient is given oxygen from the wall source, and it is something between 2 to 5 liters, but majority of the minute ventilation patient takes from the environment. So, it is a combination of oxygen from the source and the air from the environment. So, the flow is taken, the total flow requirement is not met by the source. So, variable performance low flow system is the one where the gas flow is not sufficient to meet the inspiratory demand, and that is why it does not give you a consistent and predictable FiO2. The factors which can change the FiO2 of a patient in these cases would be the breathing pattern, the size of the available oxygen reservoir, whether it is the anatomical reservoir or the mask which you are using in front, or it would also depend upon the flow rate. The only advantage of these devices are that they are cheap, they are comfortable and easy to set up. The only problem is that you cannot have a consistent FiO2. So, low flow systems are adequate if the tidal volume is between 300 to 700 ml, if the rate is less than 25 per minute and the ventilatory pattern is regular and consistent. And it should be used in situation where a constant FiO2 is not required. Look for a situation if a patient has an acute exacerbation of COPD with gross acidemia. Here the requirement for FiO2 is very precise and consistent. So, in such cases, if you use a low flow system, there can be a lot of fluctuation in the FiO2 of patient depending upon the breathing pattern of these patients. So, a low flow system is not suitable for patient with acute exacerbation of COPD. A low flow system should not be confused with a system which provides low concentration of oxygen. In fact, with the low flow system, you can provide the patient an FiO2 ranging from 0.2 to 0.9. So, here are the different devices for low flow system. As you can see here, this is the most common is the nasal cannula. Then you have a mask, nasal mask, then mask with the reservoir. So, mask with the reservoir are usually of two types, one with the rebreathing or non-rebreathing valves. So, these are the commonly used systems. The important thing here is that with nasal cannula you can provide an FiO2 something between 0.24 to 0.36. With the mask you can go up to 0.5, and when you need an FiO2 higher than 0.5, then it is important to use mask with a reservoir. In the reservoir you have two varieties, as I mentioned. With the rebreathing valve, then the FiO2 can go up to 0.7 to 0.8, and if you are using non-rebreathing valve, the FiO2 can go up to 0.9. The nasal cannula, as is the most frequently used low flow delivery system. It can give a flow, you can usually use a flow of 0.5 to 6 liters. Normally with low flow system, with the nasal cannula, we do not go beyond 6 liters. There is no significant change in the FiO2 beyond 6 liters because the anatomical dead space is completely saturated by that time. Whenever you are using nasal cannula and the flow rates are more than 4 liters, it is preferable to use a humidifying system. The patient's nasal passages must be patent when you are using a nasal cannula to fill up the anatomical dead space, which is the nasopharynx and the oropharynx. However, patient need not be a nasal breather for having adequate oxygenation. So you can predict the FiO2 with the use of nasal cannula. So roughly, if the patient breathing pattern is constant and if the patient is breathing less than 25 cycles per minute, then for each liter there is a change of 4%. So the target here you can see that if the tidal volume is smaller and the breathing is slower, the FiO2 can be higher for a given flow rate. On the other hand, if the tidal volume is larger and or the breathing rate is faster, then for the given flow rate, the FiO2 can be lower. So this is the rough guide for patients who are given nasal cannula, and you can see that if you increase the flow rates from 1 liter to 6 liter, there is a increase in the FiO2 by 4 for each liters. It's very important that this is true for patients who have a breathing rate or a breathing frequency around 20 per minute. So here is an example by which you can see that how you can calculate FiO2 with a nasal cannula or a low flow system. So here is a healthy person with a normal ventilatory pattern whose tidal volume is 500, respiratory rate is 20. So respiratory rate is 20 means each respiratory cycle is 3 seconds. His inspiratory time is 1 second, expiratory time is 2 seconds. The anatomical reservoir, which is nasopharynx and oropharynx, is 50 ml. Now this anatomical dead space is filled with pure oxygen towards the end of expiration. So what we see that if a patient is breathing at the rate of 20 per minute, his duty cycle is 3 seconds, expiratory time is 2 seconds. In the last half seconds, when he is practically not breathing, it is a stage when patient is breathing is suspended, the anatomical dead space gets filled with pure oxygen. So if you want to calculate if this patient is having an oxygen flow rate of 6 liters, then 50 ml of oxygen will be for anatomical dead space, because you can see it's 6 liter per minute, and it would become for half second, for 1 second it will be 100 ml, and during the last half second when it will fills the anatomical dead space, it will be 50 ml. And 6 liters per minute, that means 100 ml per second, and the inspiratory time is 1 second, so that means 100 ml of oxygen he will get from the cannula, and rest of the 350 ml of air he will take from the environment, whose FiO2 is 20% or 0.20. So this will be equivalent to 70 ml. So you can add up 100 ml plus 50 ml and 70 ml. So you can get the FiO2 of 0.44. So your patient who has a tidal volume of 500 ml, who is breathing at a frequency of 20 per minute and is getting 6 liter per minute oxygen, his FiO2 will be 0.44. So what are the advantages of nasal cannula? It is comfortable, it is convenient, patient can eat, speak and cough, and the FiO2 increases in a consistent manner in a majority of cases. But the disadvantage is that the FiO2 is not consistent. It will change with the breathing pattern of the patient, and it may also cause some local irritation in the nose, particularly when the flows are high. So this is the nasal cannula, and the next one is the nasal mask. Now the question comes, when do you want to use nasal mask, or when you shift your patient from nasal cannula to nasal mask? Now once you have used your nasal cannula to the maximum, that is 6 liters per minute, and you have probably achieved your FiO2 of around 0.4, and still your patient is not adequately oxygenated and you need a higher FiO2, in that case you will shift your patient to nasal mask. The principle of behind changing from nasal cannula to nasal mask is increasing the dead space. So as I mentioned to you, our anatomical dead space was 50 ml in the nasopharynx, and if you add another dead space of 100 to 200 ml, this will get filled with pure oxygen during the end of expiration, which can be rebreathed as a pure oxygen. So that is how the nasal mask helps in improving the FiO2 of our patient. So, whenever you are using nasal mask, that means you will be using the oxygen flow rates of more than 6 liters per minute, and the upper limit to which you can go with the nasal mask will be 8 to 9 liters. By that time, this dead space will also get fully saturated. So, this nasal mask, it's a low flow system. So, here you can get the FiO2 something between 35 to 50%. At a flow rate something between 6 to 8 liters. It will provide an additional reservoir of 100 and 200 ml and may increase the FiO2. The only disadvantage is that if you use the nasal mask with flow rates less than 6 liters, this dead space will not be washed out by your oxygen flow, and then you are likely to rebreathe carbon dioxide rich expired air. So, this can lead to increase in the PCO2 level, and which can be quite dangerous when you are treating your patient with acute exacerbation of COPD. So, this is so if you see here, so when you use nasal mask, so you start with 5 to 6 liters, 6 to 7 and you can go maximum up to 0.6 liters. So, there are situations when you have to use your low flow system to have even a further FiO2. So, even with nasal mask, if you are not able to achieve your target PO2, then you may have to further increase the FiO2. So, with nasal mask, you may not be able to go beyond 0.6. So, if you need further increase in your FiO2, as can happen in patients with the ARDS, severe ARDS, then you may have to use the next low flow device, that is mask with reservoir bag. So, when you have to use this mask with reservoir bag, you have to further increase your flow rates. So, you can see here that when you are using the reservoir mask, you are increasing the FiO2 beyond 0.6 and the flow rates have to go beyond 9 liters per minute, and the maximum from the wall supply you can go is up to 10 to 15 liters. So, this is the mask, nasal mask, and this is the mask with the reservoir, and you have two low flow system masks with reservoir, one with the rebreathing valve, the other one without the rebreathing valve. So, with the non-rebreathing valve, you can increase your FiO2 to further up to maybe 0.9, and here the mask with the rebreathing, the maximum you can go is 0.8. The important thing is here to know is that when you should use a rebreathing valve and when you should not use non-rebreathing valve. When you are transporting your patient from a smaller hospital to a bigger hospital, in that case you should not use a non-rebreathing valve, because in non-rebreathing valve your oxygen requirement, the flow rates are much higher and you are likely to exhaust your oxygen source on the way. So, always shift your patient with a rebreathing valve system. So, this gives you an idea about the different flow rates, the different devices, low flow devices, and the FiO2 which you are going to achieve. So, you can see here that with non-rebreathing valves going up to 15 liters, you can go up to 0.9, and with rebreathing valve, the maximum you can go is 0.8. So, this is about the low flow system, and it very clearly shows that low flow system does not mean low oxygen. In fact, with low flow system, you can achieve the highest levels of FiO2. Next, we go to the fixed performance high flow system. Now, this system gives you the gas flow which is sufficient to meet all the inspiratory demands. What we mean by this is that when a person is using a high flow system, he is actually breathing through that system, and there is no entrainment of air from the environment. Now, for this you will have to generate very high flow rates which will demand the inspiratory flow rates of the patient. So, the advantage is that when there is no entrainment of air from the environment, it will provide consistent and predictable FiO2. the patient's ventilatory pattern will not affect the FiO2, and this system basically works on the principle of Venturi, and you can also have a much better control of humidity and temperature with this system. So if you see, this is a high flow system. The heart of the high flow system is a Venturi device, as you can see here, where the oxygen is passed through this narrow tube and exits from a narrowing. When this oxygen exits from the narrowing, it comes out as a jet. It creates a negative pressure around it, and which results into the entrainment of air from this thing. So depending upon the flow rates and the size of this port, the negative pressure will be generated and there will be an entrainment of air. So by adjusting the flow rates, the portable size, you can create a ratio of oxygen and entrainment, which you can also calculate by a magic box. So you can see here, if you want to see the air oxygen entrainment ratio, you can use this magic box. Here what you are basically doing in a Venturi, you are giving 100% oxygen at a flow rate, and then you are entraining air with a FiO2 of 0.20. Suppose you want to have an FiO2, a fixed FiO2 of 0.5. Then you will see from this, you minus this 50 from 100 and you get here 50, and you also subtract 20 from this, it becomes 30. So from this you get a ratio of 50:30 or 1.7:1. So that means for each liter of oxygen you will give 1.7 liters of air will be entrapped. Now it's very important, since there is once this flow will be generated at the Venturi, it will go through the tubing. You are not going to, then the patient is not going to entrap any oxygen from the environment. So you must generate adequate flow rates. Now suppose your patient is breathing at the rate of 20 or 30 per minute. His tidal volume is 500. So that means his inspiratory time is, say, around 1 second. And in 1 second he wants 500 ml. That means in 60 liters he needs 30 liters. That means to get an adequate flow rates, you would like to give him 40 to 60 liters. So to generate 60 liters of flow, if you see this entrainment ratio, then that means you will, if you provide 50 liters of oxygen, you will get around 30 liters of air. So it will become around 45 liters. So you have to, when you are using the high flow system, it is very important to calculate the flow requirements of the patient, and then you calculate the entrainment ratio, and then accordingly you adjust the oxygen flow from the source, and then you have the entrainment ratio, and then you are going to get the flows accordingly. So this here you will see that with different devices, the different flow rates are generated. When you are treating your patient with acute exacerbation of COPD, where the requirement for FiO2 is very low. So the most important indication would be a patient who has acidemia, hypercapnia, acute exacerbation of COPD, where you want to give a very precise calculated FiO2. This device will be most suitable. So once you have given the oxygen to your patient, it is very important to monitor your patient at bedside, and this monitoring can be done by either arterial blood gases, which you may have to do periodically. You can you can monitor your patient constantly, consistently with the pulse oximetry, or you can use transcutaneous monitors. ABG is an important investigation because it gives you a much deeper picture of oxygenation of the patient, but it is expensive, it is invasive, so it can be done intermittently. It cannot be done continuously. So most important way of monitoring oxygenation of your patient is the use of pulse oximetry, and it gives you a continuous monitoring about the oxygen saturation. The disadvantage of pulse oximetry is that it does not give you anything about dyshemoglobins. So it will give you falsely high values if the patient has high levels of methemoglobin or if the patient has high levels of carboxyhemoglobin. So because most of the pulse oximeter which we use, they will measure here the two spectrums. So they will only measure either oxyhemoglobin or deoxyhemoglobin. So it's that way it is disadvantageous, and it may also be not very useful in patients who are hypotensive and patients with shock. The values may not be very effective, and also in patients who have low values. So patient with less than 70%, it may not be very effective for this thing. Then there are complications which you should look for, particularly when you are giving very high FiO2, particularly in patients with acute respiratory distress syndrome. So this can lead to further worsening of either acidosis, there can be absorption atelectasis, or there can be oxygen toxicity. So these are the important things which you have to observe, particularly if the FiO2 of your patient is more than 0.6. So the most important complication of high oxygen is hypoventilation, and this is particularly seen in patients with acute exacerbation of COPD, with hypercapnia and acidemia, and if they are given indiscriminate oxygen, then they can go into acute CO2 retention, CO2 narcosis, and this is due to loss of the local reflexes at the alveolar level because of loss of hypoxemic vasoconstriction, and this can also be due to Harden effect. You should also look for the local tissue injury, because many of the patients with the acute lung injury, you may see that there may be worsening of the acute lung injury, particularly when the primary condition is improving, patient's fever is going down, patient hemodynamic status is improving, but his lung gas exchange is worsening. Then that means that there is a oxygen toxicity due to high FiO2, and the picture is very similar to acute lung injury or ARDS. The factors which increase the susceptibility to oxygen toxicity are steroids, hypothermia, hyperthyroidism, vitamin E deficiencies. Now, these are the important things which are there, but they are much more important when you are giving oxygen on long-term basis. So in acute conditions, particularly in the ICUs, the oxygen toxicity is mainly associated with high FiO2s. So with this, I would like to conclude my talk saying that oxygen therapy is one of the most important treatment modality. It is the least understood modality. Whenever you want to give oxygen to your patient, it is very important to decide the indication. It is very important to decide the dose in terms of liters per minute or FiO2. It is very important to choose the right device. It is very important to choose a high flow system, particularly when you are dealing your patient with acute exacerbation of COPD. The low flow systems can give you the highest degree of FiO2. The high flow systems are very good between 0.24 to 0.36. Thank you very much.